You are listening to episode 30 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Today we're going to put ourselves in the perspective of our friends and family when asking us about practices they don't understand, as we speak with Eli Effinger-Weintraub. How often do you get quizzical looks when you say you're a secular Buddhist? Ever get asked, what does that mean exactly? Or, even as more traditional Buddhists, when you talk with someone about going on retreat, taking up a week's vacation to practice anapanasati. The simple fact is, we all have certain impressions associated with words. When our friends hear us talk about things that seem to be in conflict, like secular and Buddhism, it's not surprising that they might get that glassy-eyed expression, and we end up explaining what we mean. And meditation, that one can take some time to reassure them we're not going to be passing out flowers at the airport. Of course, this is a human thing. We're all subject to having baggage and associations with things we hear. So today, with the help of Eli Effinger-Weintraub, I'm going to ask all of you to put yourself on the other side of that discussion. Notice what impressions arise as we talk about secular paganism. There, right there. What was that like? See if we're any good in keeping our minds open when they start talking about spellcraft. And we let them tell us what they mean, and find out those impressions may not be entirely correct for some traditions. My guest Eli was an audience member during the panel discussion from episode 22, Losing My Religion, and joined in on the discussion on the Facebook fan page for The Secular Buddhist. This discussion challenged me and others in reviewing our concepts about ways human beings have found to put our minds in more positive places. So, sit back, relax, have yourself the potion of your choice, and join us at a coffee shop in St. Paul. We've got some background noise, so here's a meditation for you. Sit with us at the table. Let those sounds go, and join us in the conversation. Find out how much we have in common, too. And we are here with Eli. Eli, thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So what prompted this discussion, how we ended up in the podcast, is we were on the Facebook fan page on a discussion about the episode that had to do with losing my religion, coming out as an atheist. And you were in the audience at Convergence for that particular episode where it was a big panel discussion and we were chatting about things there.
The Uber Mega Panel.
The Uber Mega Panel, yeah. That was described just the other day. I was out with the Skeptics. We were having a get-together, and they described it exactly the same way as, like, everybody was on that panel.
Yeah.
And what we ended up having is the discussion that we were having on Facebook about it evolved a bit, and we had a very interesting dialogue with you and Earl Frank Rickonis, who's been on the podcast, and we're chatting about different approaches to imagination and setting one's mind in a particular framework. And you had mentioned something about spellcraft. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, one of the things that Earl said that I really thought captured it pretty well was talking about, I think he said, corralling the placebo effect.
Are you saying the placebo effect?
And,
yes, yeah.
And really, really putting that to work for me. Cynthia Jones, who's one of the co-founders of the Diana's Grove Mystery School in Missouri, talks about ritual and spellcraft as, she calls it, a multi-sensorial prayer that lays down new pathways in the soul. And
awesome. That will be quoted, by the way.
Oh yes. That is an oft-quoted definition that goes around in our circles. And to me, when I hear that, I say neuroplasticity. Mm-hmm. And for, spellcraft is one of those things, if you ask 5 pagans what it means, you'll get 7 different answers. And most of which have something to do with this hazy and ill-defined thing called the astral plane. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that you send your energy up into the astral and you affect changes that somehow then bounce back down here, sort of.
There are visual effects and gestures going on with this, everyone. I wish you could see it. It's awesome. It's exactly what you would think we would be doing as we talk about this.
Yeah. It's sort of like a giant, water cycle. Your energy goes up and collects, and then it comes down.
The clouds, and then it rains down.
And magically things happen.
Yeah.
But being a naturalist and not believing in that sort of thing, for me, spell work is, the other definition I use is poetic psychology. And it is a way of engaging all of my senses and all of my body in a ritual that helps focus me on my goals and helps clarify where I'm at and where I need to go to be where I'm going.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned being a pagan and a naturalist.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that, because as those of us who are secularists and Buddhists sometimes run into, I suspect, very similar.
Yeah. 2 atheists for the pagans, 2 pagan for the atheists. I was raised in an interfaith household. I have one Christian parent and one Jewish parent, which led at a very early age to a lot of, well, no, wait a minute. All kept very quietly to myself, of course. But, looking at the doctrines of those 2 religions and saying, now, if you say this and you say this, how can you both be right? How can either of you be right? Mm-hmm. And then I got to college and started studying. I took a class on Eastern religion. Yeah. And my mind just went, and spent a lot of time curled up in the fetal position. Oh my God, nothingness. Like most college freshmen do.
Yeah.
And so at some point I sort of fell into paganism. There was a cute girl involved.
I ended up in Minneapolis. Yeah, I know all that stuff happens. Yeah.
And I somehow, being at that age where you do all sorts of things that make absolutely no sense, I ended up in this polytheistic religion, partly because I was so moved by the reverence for nature, and not just, the church I grew up in was like, well, we love nature because God made nature, whereas paganism is, no, we love nature for itself.
By itself, yeah. No external influence is necessary. It's great on its own.
And yet there's all of this. There is polytheism and there is magic. Like most people think of magic. Like, I light this candle or bury this rock.
The wish-fulfilling gem.
Under this tree during this phase of the moon, and Johnny Depp falls in love with me. And for several years, I was trying to convince myself that I believed in all of that. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, Actually, can't remember if it was the Science Channel or the Discovery Channel started replaying. One January, they replayed Cosmos. There was like a new remastered version, and we just happened to turn the TV on one day, and I was like, and I'd never seen it before, but I looked at the television, but the TV was on, and I said, "What are we watching?"
Yeah,
and my wife said, "Oh, just one of the coolest things ever," and that was date night. For the next however many months was Tuesday night. We would come home and we would make dinner, and then we would sit on the couch and watch Cosmos together, and it was one of those experiences that made me say, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Not that I was learning anything I didn't know about myself, but that somehow that experience finally made me feel like I had permission.
Yeah. That is the exact word that I was thinking of as you were describing this, and it came up in the interview I did earlier today, which would have been a previous podcast by the time you're hearing this. Everyone who's tuned in to the podcast.
Greetings to you in the future.
Greetings to you in the future, yes. I just did the interview with Rick Bateman from the secularbuddhist.com site. And we were chatting about the idea that it enables people it gives them permission. And this also came up in the interview with Stephen Batchelor, that what we're doing is making it okay to have a skeptical, secular, naturalist kind of view in our spiritual practices, whatever they are.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you say that was date night on Tuesdays. I can think of very few better ways to have date night than to watch Cosmos, because that brought many of us who have a skeptical point of view about things into the fold. Carl Sagan was quite a leader in the skeptical movement, and his book Demon Haunted World is where he brings up the ideas of we need to question these beliefs, particularly when we can directly demonstrate harmful effects with them, and more so that it's okay not to buy everything in a particular religious framework or any kind of framework, even at our day jobs when we're fed stuff. It's not so like, as long as we cut costs by getting rid of vacation time, everything will be great. It's appropriate for us to go, really?
Yeah.
I'd like to see a little bit of evidence, a little bit of data supporting that. So it's interesting you should say that the Cosmos and watching it gave permission for this, and that in itself can be a very freeing experience.
It absolutely was.
Yeah.
It does sometimes cause friction when dealing with other pagans who, I've had people tell me flat out, well, you're not a real pagan. If you don't believe in all of this stuff. You're just sort of some sort of crazy atheist. Why don't you just go be an atheist?
Right. And that's come up. How many of you listening to the podcast, raise your hand if you have a secular practice and you've had an engagement with a more traditional Buddhist and they've said, well, you're not taking the practice seriously if you don't believe in rebirth. And we're like, well, it's for a lot of us, we're not writing rebirth off. It's just we've not really seen enough convincing evidence to that effect. It's okay if someone pops in, but I've seen there are far too many Eleanor Roosevelts walking around for me to really go with a serious view of rebirth. And I find it unnecessary because the practice itself can help in this very lifetime, and whether it's a meditative practice or spellcraft practice that helps set our mind and has positive effects in our daily life. Tell us more about the spellcraft component in particular. We were talking about that on the Facebook page, and you were describing a spellcraft, and we asked about that. And the way you describe what that is, tell us what that looks like and what form that takes.
Okay. Well, for me, one of the things that has always been really important is to to plan a spell in such a manner that it actively engages all of my senses. So, the first step in any spell, whether you're a naturalist or a supernaturalist pagan,
right.
is to set intention.
Intention's big with us Buddhist-y types too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because
intention's key.
If you go off half-cocked, you get disastrous results. And so I will, because of my particular viewpoint, my intention will be very personally focused, because I don't believe that my spells have the power to impact change,
tangible reality.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, if I am going on a 20-mile bike ride, I'm never going to cast a spell for a sunny day because I don't have that power. What I can do is to cast a spell that will make me more aware of the signs of what weather is coming, so that I can look out in the morning and say, today's going to be a really crummy day to bike 20 miles. Or, you know, maybe I better pack a little more rain gear today.
Right.
And so it's a heightened awareness of the things that are going on around me in the world. So then I will close. We're a bunch of clothes horses.
Yeah.
And, unless you work naked, but that's... Few of us in Minnesota do.
Yeah, in Minnesota you're either being eaten by mosquitoes or you get frostbite.
Exactly.
Working naked. Fun though it may be in certain circumstances.
So the clothes are one way that we can begin to set our minds. You know, I put on something pretty that flows, and then I feel comfortable and can move around in. I usually I crochet and sew, and so I usually like to incorporate at least one thing that I've made that really it makes me feel confident in myself.
Yeah.
Because I have accomplished this thing. I have made this shirt or these pants. So it's a sort of self-encouraging cycle.
Yeah.
I have been successful in the past, therefore I can be successful again in the future. And also, if I'm comfortable and I've got fabrics that feel nice, then now I'm into the tactile. And so then I will have nice ambient lighting, or a bright sunny day.
Depending on what it is you're
Depending
doing.
on what I need, right. And I'll light a candle, a scented candle to get the scent, and also their sight, just, you know, because sometimes you sort of drift off and like, ooh, pretty thin. Don't set things on fire, I swear. And I'll have music playing suitable to my intention. If I'm doing a working for greater tranquility, then I want something nice and
light,
serene. And if I need energy for something, then it's Tool. I know people who have their like special pagan music collection and they'll only use that sort of stuff, but you know, give me the good beat. You know.
What hits?
And the angry.
It's the same way when we're if you're doing meditation. I know my roommate, for example, has particular DVDs that she listens to help her set her mind in a particular calm framework.
Yep.
And yet, when I go out running, that's not something I'm going to have on my iTunes going beyond, because that's not going to help me set my pace.
Right.
To it and energize me for the run.
No.
Yeah.
It'd be a nice mosey.
Yeah. If it's my long, slow distance run, the aptly named LSD, then okay, maybe something a little quieter.
Yeah.
So when you're doing when you're doing the spells, I think this touches on something that we in our atheist community run into a great deal, is that we will hear phrases like casting a spell or I do meditation, and that may make some of our atheist hackles rise up. And we go, wait a minute, that's wrong and that's bad. And we discount the whole thing without really understanding what is it that we're doing here. And what you're describing is something very much where I'm setting my mind in a positive framework for what I want to accomplish. As you said very aptly, this is intention.
Yeah.
And that energy, that intention carries forth in manifesting in our actions, in our words, and that's very much what we do in meditation, is that we need to maintain that, whatever we're getting to in our meditations, off the cushion when we go into work or driving in or a particular thing we're doing.
And I liken it to throwing a rock in a pond. And that's something that's a metaphor that gets used a lot in pagan communities.
Yeah.
I just happen to believe that I am the rock, the pond, and the thrower. For me, I do this spell and I am changing thought patterns, which in turn changes behavior patterns. And I go out into the world, like you said, you have to at some point get off the cushion and drive to work.
Right.
So the spell ends and I go to my job or I go to the grocery store and I like to make something tangible. I guess I never outgrew arts and crafts from summer camp.
That's artistic, folks.
Actually, that's right. Actually, this is something that really working with my wife, who has the same practice as I do. She's an artist and she's a visual artist, and she's always about, let's make something.
Yeah.
We're gonna have the intention and do the spell, and we're gonna come up with imagery that we can then make something tangible and maybe have with us or keep on an altar that we see every day. And as that constant reminder, because it's easy once the spell is over and you feel so good, but then work is boring, boss is a schmuck, and some idiot cuts you off in traffic, and it's hard to maintain
equanimity or positive energy.
Any of that you were trying to accomplish with the spell. So sometimes it's nice to have something tangible that you can touch or look at and say, oh yeah, that was that thing I did to make me calm.
Yeah. And that's the reminder that we have in my room where I do my meditative practice. I have a little candle holder that's a Buddha, and it has a Bodhi leaf behind it, and it casts a really nice shadow on the wall. They put a candle there, and it looks really good. And this is not an object of reverence or worship for me. This is a reminder. This is something that, to me, it triggers as part. It's my Pavlovian response I've set up for myself, that my mental mouth waters. And when I see that, I was like, that helps me get in the right frame of mind. When I put on my relaxy pants and I sit down on the cushion, seeing that and being in those clothes and having that light down and just the candle, this isn't an invalid use of ritual. This is a perfectly rational use of ritual in preparing the mind and setting the tone. And we do that in different ways.
Right.
And I think one of the things that this is very helpful, and why I wanted to have the interview, is that it really puts a focus on, we all have different approaches that really do very similar things for us.
Right.
And whether it's a very distinctly religious form of a practice, or whether it's a very different tradition, or whether we call it spellcraft, or whatever we call it, what we're doing is very often the same thing. And I think it's very important in our interfaith dialogues, or our non-faith dialogues, as the case is often, that we will really find more commonality when we have that open mind of spellcraft. What do you mean? Oh, that's really cool. To me, that's a much more interesting way of approaching things.
And I know, intellectually, that a good, hearty pep talk would probably, in general, get me the same results. Mm-hmm. But as a creative person in all the other areas of my life, I know for myself that a good hearty pep talk just doesn't hit me on all the levels that it needs to. Whereas when I do a spell, there will usually be movement. I'll get up and dance around at some point. I'll usually when I'm done, there will be probably a cookie involved.
That's interesting. I think I may add the oatmeal raisin Scooby snack at the end of my meditation. That's something I look forward to at the end of my 40-minute sitting.
Well, it's very intense focus for a while, and one of the, almost without fail, I hear it from all sorts of pagans, like the first thing when we kind of pop our heads up at the end of a spell or ritual, like, man, I could use a snack. And in fact, a lot of traditions, rituals have something called cakes and ale, actually built into the ritual. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot like communion in Christianity, and it's both a sort of sharing, because just of that deep connection of sharing food with somebody, and also because it usually happens, if you study the structure of most rituals, you'll find it happens pretty near the end, where everybody's kind of drained. We did our thing. Now
refreshment.
Snack time. And sometimes rituals are a lot like kindergarten, because like there'll be this sort of guided meditation trance work sort of thing, which is a lot like nap time, and then you have your cookies and milk, or your case and ale or whatever afterwards, and some traditions more than others. I happen to, my pagan tradition is an ecstatic tradition that was started by a bunch of anarchist feminists, and so nothing is too ridiculous if it serves our purpose. Some of the more traditional traditions who take themselves very seriously, with the long white robes and whatever, please don't ever call it milk and cookies. That's not us. It's cakes a day, even if we're having, grape juice and fig Newtons.
But again, it goes back to what works for
exactly. I know a
experience.
lot of people who have been to rituals in my tradition and said, "How do you guys ever get anything done? I go to your rituals and all I feel is chaos. I feel buffeted by chaos." And those of us who are really into that say it's like playtime, and it really lets us access a very playful part of our brain that maybe a lot of us don't get to interact with all that often as we're trying to pretend to be grown-ups.
Yeah, and be adults and respectable, and there's a certain way we're supposed to be. We have this dialogue. And I just thought one of my favorite quotes from, I'm going to get my geek on here and say, my quotes from Doctor Who. It's, what's the point in being grown up if you can't act childish sometimes? And having that balance of approaching things with a light heart, and whether we call it beginner's mind or playtime or lightheartedness, whatever we want to be, that helps free us up and take away a lot of the hindrances, we call them, or things that get in our way from being in touch with the moment and the joy that we can experience just in this very moment. I think that's one of the things that we're referring to. So what are some things that, as have these dialogues and these discussions, there are ways which are more inviting of dialogue. Do you find that there are some things that help invite the discussion and other things that are more putty-offy? Because you're in that unique place, too, as a naturalist pagan. What are some of the things that you run into in having that are, here's someone I can have a discussion with, and that's okay, and others were, have a nice day, and oh my, look at the time.
The sad thing is that I actually find myself having friction more often with other pagans. That's where the sticking point tends to be more often, is that people, and one of the reasons for that is when you go into a pagan ritual, especially in my tradition, we have something called witch camp, and that's anywhere from 50 to 80 pagans romping around together for about a week. And mostly the people who go to these all come from this same tradition. And so you walk into these spaces and people tend to make assumptions. We're all here at this space, therefore we must all believe the same thing.
This same way.
Right. And the interesting thing about the reclaiming tradition is that, in some traditions they're more focused perhaps on a specific pantheon. And so you can assume that everyone there is going to be worshiping Egyptian gods. Reclaiming, I like to talk about reclaiming as like a mug. Everybody who practices reclaiming has the same mug, but everybody's drinking something out of it.
Next metaphor.
We have people who work exclusively with, say, the Norse pantheon. A friend and teacher of mine has a pantheon, a personal pantheon of, gods he worships, that is basically made of trickster deities and figures from many
various
different cultures around the world. So everybody's coming at it with something a little different, but there's still that assumption that deity in some form is involved, whether you're talking about individual specific named deities or the divine as some sort of
this thread of divine,
mysterious, whatever. And so to be sitting at the table at dinner one night and to have somebody say, if the theme of the camp, say, because there'll always be some sort of theme that we're all working with, and if Freya is big in this story, to have somebody say, well, do you do any particular work with Freya? And to say, well, actually, I'm a naturalistic pagan.
Although I do have a sled that's drawn by cats. So does that count?
If I could find a way to convince my cats to pull a sled,
that would be awesome. The things you remember from your grade school education.
That's impressive.
Wow.
I'm lucky if I can get my cats not to stand on me in the middle of the night.
Most people are lucky if they can't get their cats not to stand on them. Yeah.
And to say to someone who is very God this, goddess that, to say, well, actually, I'm a naturalist.
Yeah.
And then listen to the crickets chirping.
And dropping.
And there's a sort of, and I hate saying this because one likes to think of oneself as an honest, a scrupulously honest person. But sometimes there's a sort of selective honesty, and there's a way to phrase it, because my practice is very literally earth-based. The sense of nature and the cosmos being sacred, not in the sense of God is
It
up
has
there,
a
sacred.
divine component,
It
but
does.
is an awesome thing.
Right, just because, oh my gosh, how freaking cool is it that it even exists?
Yeah, we don't need anything more than that.
Right,
it's awesome on its own.
And so, you know, when I'm talking to other pagans to say, well, I have a more literally earth-based practice, and I sort of reverence the earth, and maybe not get into my personal definition of reverence not really having anything to do with
Anything supernatural.
with anything supernatural, exactly. And then maybe when talking to the atheists, to couch it a little more like, well, you know, I honor and respect the earth as our home and as being amazing because it exists and because of the amazing diversity of life and processes that go on in it.
And by the way, Cosmos Date Night, yay.
Yeah, right. And leave out the part about the naked full moon dancing. And
it's true, and I find myself doing the same thing when I'm at a meeting of, say, the Minnesota atheist group. Our topic of conversations are going to be more along those lines, and it's not being intellectually dishonest. It's simply focusing on the topic at hand.
Right.
And there's going to be a different level of interest in this other aspect to me. I don't, for example, have long, drawn-out conversations about marathon training when I'm at Minnesota Atheist Group either. It's off topic.
Right.
It doesn't really apply.
Yeah.
And so I put it in that same bucket as, well, what are we talking about?
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Well, and it's also by doing that, that lets us focus first on the commonalities.
Right.
Like
right.
you were talking about before, that it's easier to have the conversations when we start from a place of, this is how we're alike.
Yeah.
Rather than to start out being abrasive and
Antagonistic.
and antagonistic, and to say, well, I'm here at a meeting of your organization, or I'm here at an event of your kind of people, and here's all the ways I'm not like that. That just doesn't go over well with anybody.
Right.
Yeah. And then there's the times in the middle when you're talking to people who are neither atheists nor pagans, and then, oh my gosh, where do you even
It could be challenging
start
finding that common
again?
framework.
I once accidentally outed myself as a pagan to an entire table full of my coworkers, all of whom were very devout Christians, and at a TGI Friday. Which somehow just upped the awkwardness level 100-fold. I don't know what it was, but we were all out celebrating a coworker birthday, and I foolishly mentioned that because I had just come back from witch camp, and
so you got the energy.
I have the
you
energy,
just your mind is set in this.
Somehow my brain did not stop and think spiritual retreat. Say spiritual retreat.
Right.
I was just like, well, when I was at witch camp,
We had a get together a night or two ago, Skeptic, downtown in Minneapolis, and it's a skeptical organization. And there was a girl there that I was chatting with for a while who thought that this skeptic organization was skeptic about the government and things like that. So she was very much a 9/11 conspiracy person and anti-vaccination and all the rest of it. And of course, we're a very welcoming community.
Right,
so we're like,
right.
we're glad you're here. And she said, I'm looking for conversations with people who question and are intelligent. I'm like, wow, you're in the right place. But she was just like, oh, yeah, I kind of found the wrong group for what I'm thinking. It's like, is there anyone here that thinks like I do? I'm like, probably not so much. Is there anyone here who would talk with me about 9/11? I said, oh, yeah, everyone here will talk with you about it.
Right.
You might get a few questions.
Right.
And that's okay. And honestly, I hope they come back, because her approach was very much I did my research and I came to these conclusions. And that's fine, and that's great, and let's have an ongoing dialogue, because we don't always get all of the information. We do come to different conclusions based on the same set of data. And it may be spellcraft, it may be meditation, it may be, for some folks, saying the Jesus prayer. That's okay, that's fine. We find what resonates best with us. And that's what I like about having the dialogues, that we do have that diversity, and we can celebrate it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's great. I think it's awesome. Eli, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Ted. You're welcome. It was a great conversation.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.